The NFL offseason here. I think it's time to look at possibilities for each team's big trade, free agency signing, and big time player that they might draft to improve themselves in 2025. Let's talk football. All right, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the All Around Sports Podcast, where sports, are everything on this channel. I'm your host, Antonio. Today, we are doing a list of every 32 NFL teams' big trade, signing, and draft predictions and possibilities that could happen for their team this upcoming offseason. Of course, we know that NFL free agency kicks off in the second week of March, but we also know that there's some good trades that could happen. But the question is, what are those for each team? So here's how this is going to work. For each team, I'm going to have a specific player that they'll draft, sign, and trade for. Each of those, and it's different for each team. So it's not going to be the same player twice. So before we get started into this video, I hope you all enjoy this video. If you do, please make sure to do me a favor and smash the like button down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to aim for 750 subscribers before we hit the 2025-26 NFL season. But for now, let's get this video started. I'm going to move from the AFC to the NFC. So we're going to start with the AFC. First team of the AFC is the Cincinnati Bengals. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to have on my right side of me, I'm going to have the team and then the different categories that I have. So first one, free agency signing, Dre Greenlaw. Now, Greenlaw is a free agent of the 49ers. I don't think the 49ers are going to be big into re-signing him because they already have Fred Warner. So if the Bengals can get out there and get Dre Greenlaw, he is a stud linebacker. He is arguably one of the most dangerous linebackers that we've witnessed. So I believe they get him in free agency to help with their defense a little bit. And then trade, I have them trading for Cooper Kupp. Let me explain why. Let's just say that they can't get T. Higgins re-signed. Cooper Kupp, I believe, will be a top trade candidate for the Cincinnati Bengals because they need someone else to pair up alongside Jamar Chase. So I believe Cooper Kupp will come in as that second receiver. And then NFL draft player, I have Jalon Walker from the University of Georgia. Jalon Walker, I look at this young man. He is a monster on the front seven. He has been a playmaker all season during his time in Georgia. I believe that Jalon Walker will help this defense out a little bit. I believe the Cincinnati Bengals will address their needs in the entirety of the offseason and be right back in contention for a Super Bowl appearance and possibly an AFC Championship game to face off against Kansas City. But we'll see what happens. But that's mine for the Bengals. On to the next team. And next up, you got the team I like to call the black and gold incarnation of winners, the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers, the people I have them free agency signing are either one of two people, Aaron Rodgers or Sam Darnold. Each of these two quarterbacks are really good. And now that the Jets' job is now open, I believe Justin Fields is a lost cause. But Aaron Rodgers, he's still a decent quarterback. I mean, he's not same level as Russell Wilson, but he's still got an arm. If they go out there and get him in the free agency, I would laugh so hard. But as far as Sam Darnold goes, Sam Darnold had an MVP-like year in Minnesota. If Mike Tomlin gets him in Pittsburgh and can get him under his own, and they could be a scary team if they get Sam Darnold. But next up, the trade candidate, I have the Debo Samuel because, or Debo Samuel, I call him Debo Samuel because of last year. But Debo Samuel, I believe is going to be a good trade candidate or cut candidate for the Niners. Either way, I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers will land him because the Steelers need another receiver to complement George Pickens. That is, if they don't trade him. This offense needs to be built. They have to go out there and get offensive weapons. Their defense is already stacked up enough as is. They just need to go out there and get some offensive guys and have an offense that can compete within the AFC North. And then the draft candidate I have for him is Calvin Banks Jr. Now, he does have a little bit of injury history, so that's something to keep an eye on. But I believe that Calvin Banks, they need another offensive lineman because it looked like Troy Fautanu was a bust. So they need to go out there and get another guy like a Calvin Banks Jr., get him for in the draft, and then assess your other needs later on in the draft. But that's my thoughts on the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things. On to the next team. Next up, you got the Cleveland Browns. Now, the Browns, I believe their top free agency priority is re signing Nick Chubb. They have to get Nick Chubb back. He is the only thing on this offense that is keeping the Browns relevant. It's the only way for them to stay relevant. Because if they can't keep Nick Chubb, they're a lost cause. But then the trade candidate I have is Robert Hunt of the Carolina Panthers. Now, Robert Hunt, he is an offensive lineman. You need some more offensive linemen to help protect Deshaun Watson. Now, I don't think they'll trade for a quarterback because I believe they're going to let Deshaun Watson play out his contract and then go out and get a quarterback afterwards. But I believe that Robert Hunt would be a good trade candidate because they need some offensive line help. But draft candidate, I have this one because of the situation going on with Myles Garrett. I have Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter was arguably one of the best defensive players in the entire college football league last year during the part of Penn State's run. And Abdul Carter, I've watched this kid a few times. He gives me vibes of what Micah Parsons brought to the Dallas Cowboys. He gives me vibes of that because he is an outstanding playmaker. He is an amazing defensive player, and he's one of the top edge rushers in this year's draft. So the Browns need some big time help, especially if they're going to let Myles Garrett go in a trade, which I don't think they will, but just in case. But the Browns, that's my thought on the Browns. On to the next squad. Next up on the list is the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Ravens, I believe their free agent candidate is Tolina Hufunga. Because Hufunga, he is a safety. I believe they need a third guy to complement Nate Wiggins and Kyle Hamilton. Because we know that Mark Andrews had that drop. I'm gonna get into that in a sec. But this, I believe, would be a great situation for this team. But I believe that Tuli Hufunga is a top candidate because he's not going to stay in San Francisco. I believe he'll go somewhere else. He wants to go to a real contender and join up with the Ravens. That's my prediction right there. Next up, I have another corner known as arguably the best corner in the league right now that's wasting his years up at South Beach. Jalen Ramsey. Let me explain why. Jalen Ramsey, I believe, is one of the best cornerbacks we've seen since Richard Sherman. But Jalen Ramsey, what brings it out to me is because that Miami, they can't find a way to contend. You just don't know what the Miami Dolphins are going to do. So I believe that the Dolphins might trade away Jalen Ramsey to a contender like the Baltimore Ravens because there Jalen Ramsey will actually have another chance to get his second Super Bowl ring. And then the draft candidate I have is Mike Green out of Marshall. This guy, I believe, is going to be a good player. He's that I anticipate as a really good athletic guy. They need some more edge rushers to complement them, especially after what happened against Buffalo, because we all know about that Mark Andrews drop that happened in the divisional round. But I believe that's what the Ravens are going to assess. Now let's move on to the next team. Next up, you got the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts, I believe their free agent signing is going to be Javon Holland. Javon Holland, I really like as a top candidate for this because you look at the Colts, they need secondary help massively. They need some big time help in the secondary because Javon Holland is a ball hawk. He was let go by the Miami Dolphins. So I believe Javon Holland will become a really good player, and I believe he'll go to Indianapolis to help out with their defense. Next up, I have on the trade candidate, I have Evan Neal of the New York Football Giants. Evan Neal, although he is not a good player, he can actually be a really good thing if he's on the right team. We all know this from first round picks of the Giants. The last 5 Super Bowl champions have had Giants first round picks. Jason Pierre-Paul with the Bucks. We know that what was it? Oh right, Odell Beckham Jr., Kadarius Toney twice, and then Saquon Barkley this past year. If they go out there and get Evan Neal, he is a first round pick from the Giants. He could thrive well if he's not in a sick city like the New York Giants are. If he goes there, I believe he'll excel. But draft candidate I have is Malachi Starks. Malachi Starks, I really like this guy as a quarterback in the league. He is an absolute stud. I like what I saw from him in his days at Georgia, but that's my candidates for the Colts. Now on to the next team. Up next, you got the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Titans, we know they have the number 1 overall pick, so I'll get into that later. But the free agent signing I have for them might surprise a lot of people. He's a free agent. DeMarcus Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence is one of the best players of the Dallas Cowboys, other than, of course, Micah. If they go out there and get a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence, that'll elevate their defense a little better, especially if Jeffrey Simmons stays there, but I think he might possibly get traded. But the trade candidate I have is Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff, he was with New York and then also was with the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl this past season. But I believe Bryce Huff is going to be a good trade candidate for the Eagles. Maybe they go out there and get some draft capital for the future. But I believe that the Titans will trade for Bryce Huff. Then the pick I have, no surprise here, Cam Ward. Cam Ward, he's arguably the best quarterback in this year's draft. If they go out there and get this guy, I'm telling you this right now, he will about have the same impact that Jaden Daniels did with the Commanders this past year. They play in one of the worst divisions in the AFC South. If they go get Cam Ward, they'll set themselves up really good for the future. So I'm going to go. That's my thoughts on the Titans. But now to the next team. And next up, you got the Jacksonville Jaguars. With the new head coach, Liam Cohen. But, man, this team, I believe, is going to be really good next year. But the free agent signing I have for them is Eli Apple. Now, Eli Apple did not do much during his time with the Chargers, but he's a good player. The Jaguars need some big help in the safety category, especially after letting go of Rashawn Jenkins the year before last season. They need some big-time safety help in their defense. I believe they go out there and get Eli Apple in free agency. And trade candidate, might surprise some people, is Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts, we know that he had some experience with Trevor Lawrence during his time at college. But this would actually benefit him because in Atlanta, Kyle Pitts has not been targeted that much. If he goes to Jacksonville and becomes a part of that Jaguars team, he'll be targeted a lot more because Trevor Lawrence played with them in Clemson. If they go out there and get Kyle Pitts in a trade, that'll help their offense massively with already the addition of Brian Thomas. But then the draft candidate I have is Tate Ratledge. Ratledge, I believe, is going to be a good offensive lineman in the league, but I believe he'll be a good candidate. But that's my thought on the Jaguars. Now to the next squad. Up next is the Houston Texans. The Texans. I have a few guys. I have one guy for free agency is Byron Murphy Jr., the corner of Minnesota. Minnesota would take a big step back if they let him walk. But think about him in Houston. Because you already got a good secondary with Caden Bullock, Derek Stingley Jr., Lester, and imagine Byron Murphy Jr. with that squad. Oh, watch out for that defense of D'Amico Ryans. But then a trade candidate I have, probably the least likely because Dallas ain't going to move on from this guy, Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, I believe he might be in this conversation, but I just put it out there just to get the views. But Micah Parsons, if he gets traded to the Texans, this would be a big step back for Dallas, which I would love if that happened. I would love it. But I believe if the Texans do try and trade him, it might not happen because Jared Jones is sold on keeping him, so he stinks. But then the draft candidate I have is Jared Ivey of the Ole Miss Rebels. One of the best defensive sacking cores that we saw in the college football last year of the SEC. The Ole Miss Rebels defensive line had the most sacks in the SEC last year. If they go out there and get Jared Ivey, that's one of the many guys from that squad that are going to be draft candidates. I believe Jared Ivey is going to be up there in that conversation, which is why I have him at that spot. But that's my Texans pick. But now to the next team. And next up, you got the former great dynasty, the New England Patriots. The Patriots. I'm thinking they might go wide receiver the whole time. But I'm of course thinking this is going to be the case. I have in free agency signing DeAndre Hopkins. Now, DeAndre Hopkins, he is a free agent of Kansas City. But I believe that the Patriots might take a chance because he's a great receiver. And then if you add him with the squad that they have and get Drake May that top guy, they could be a scary squad. Next up I have for the trade candidate, maybe might be a shock to some people, Davante Adams. Davante Adams, I think, would fit really well with the Patriots because Drake May is a deep passer. So Davante Adams is built for those offenses. And if they go out there and get him, that would be amazing. And then the pick I have for him in the draft is, no surprise here, Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter is a generational player. He plays corner and he plays receiver. He is going to be a stud in the NFL. And if they go out there and get Travis Hunter, this team will be set. I believe the Patriots are going to go primarily wide receiver to help build on this offense and then assess the offensive line primarily after Travis Hunter in the draft. But that's my thoughts on the Patriots. Now to the next squad. Next up, oh my gosh, what happened to this team? The New York Fraudulent Jets. The Jets letting go of Aaron Rodgers, and now that experiment is pretty much over. But the free agency signing I have for this team, now I had this guy originally going back to the Steelers, but this could set up very well. I have Justin Fields. Let me explain why. Justin Fields, if he goes to New York, they already have an offense set up there. They have a defensive coordinator coming in Aaron Glenn. He would be set. Now, he won 4 out of his 5 starts as a Steeler. He is a guy that I believe could set up really well if he's in the right location. Although I think the New York Jets is not the best one, I believe it's going to be one that can help grow. Because Justin Fields, I believe that he might help this offense for a season, but I believe that they might try to go out there and get him. But trade candidate I have for them is Brandon Sheriff of the Jaguars. Brandon Sheriff, I believe he'll be a good guy for this squad. I believe he'll be a good player for this team. I think they need offensive line big time, especially after letting go of Tyron Smith. But then the draft signing I have for this team is Marcus Mabo, offensive lineman of Purdue. This offensive line needs to get fixed. They need offensive pieces. They need to fix that offensive line because the defense is already set up. They just did not have the right play caller under center. But if they go out there and do this, they could set up themselves very well for possibly a playoff appearance. I wouldn't be so sure about that. But that's my thoughts on the Jets. Now to the next team. Next up on this list, you got the Miami Dolphins, the team that cannot play in the cold. But this free agency signing I have for this team is Charvarius Ward. Because Charvarius Ward, if they do trade Jalen Ramsey, like I mentioned earlier, they could set themselves up to get Charvarius Ward. Charvarius Ward is an amazing player. If they go out there and get him, they would set him up really well. Then the trade candidate I have is a third string wide receiver, Mike Williams. Now, Mike Williams, he's set up in Pittsburgh right now. I believe that the Dolphins might try and trade for him, like they did with Chase Campbell a few years ago. I believe they go out there and get Mike Williams in a trade, but that's my thought on that. Then the draft. I think they're going to go safety because I believe that's what they need to assess. And the guy I have is Nick Imonwari of the South Carolina Gamecocks, the safety of them. This guy, I believe, is going to be a really good player. I've watched some of his games. He is a good defender. He had 4 interceptions and 2 passes defended. I believe they go out there and get this guy, but I believe this guy right here, Nick E, is going to be a good candidate for the Dolphins. So that's my thought on the Dolphins. Now on to the next team. Next up on the list, you got the defending AFC East champions, the Buffalo Bills.
You were right about one thing. This ends now.
Now the Bills, I believe they might try and assess mostly their defense because their offense is pretty much well set. I like the offense they have around them. I just think the defense was what let them down. Because remember, when Christian Benford went out, that was when they kind of started to diminish in that AFC Championship game. So all 3 of these are pass rushers, just to give you a heads up. The first one I have is the man that showed up in the Super Bowl for the Eagles, Milton Williams. Milton Williams, I believe, will be a good player. Some people have him going to the Lions, but I have another player for that, which I'll mention later. Milton Williams, I believe, will be a great piece in this defense, especially if he did what he did in that Super Bowl appearance against Kansas City. Oh, you need this guy because he beat Kansas City. And then the trade candidate I have is Azeez Ojulari of the New York Giants. The Giants, I see a lot of trade candidates for them because they are garbage right now, just to sum it up. But this, I believe, would be a good eye for this team. He has been on the trade candidate talk for a few years because of his playmaking ability on defense. I like the way that he looks. And if he goes to Buffalo, watch out. And then the pick I have for this team is Ohio State national champion Jake Sawyer. Jake Sawyer was the man that made that big play in the Texas Longhorns game in the Cotton Bowl. I was there for that. And when I saw this man do that, I was like, oh, imagine that man in Buffalo. If they go out there and make these moves, that the three moves I have, I'm telling you this right now. I think they might be Super Bowl level because the offense is already good enough. I think it's the defense that ultimately let them down. So that's my thought on the Bills. Now on to the next team. Next up is the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers. I believe they're going to go similar of the Patriots. Go wide receiver here. Now I'm going to talk about this more. So let's get into it. So free agency signing I have, if he does not return to the Bengals, T. Higgins. T. Higgins is a 1 in a million. You're not going to have an opportunity to get a guy like this in free agency. This is a guy that is outstanding. If you go out there and get T. Higgins, you're setting up Justin Herbert for a really good future. Then the trade candidate I have, probably the least likely, George Pickens. Now, George Pickens, we know that the Steelers have had a few bad ego issue receivers like Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster. But what if they trade for George Pickens? Just think about it. If you set up this with Len McConkey, T. Higgins, George Pickens, oh, watch out. That would be a dangerous trio to keep an eye out for. Then the draft candidate I have is Luther Burton III of Missouri. This man, I believe, is a good stud. I believe he's really good. If they go out there and get this man and all the other two receivers that I mentioned, watch out for this team in the future because they are in a build and win now scenario with Jim Harbaugh as their coach. They made the playoffs this past year. Imagine what they could do in the future if they get the guys to surround Justin Herbert and that defense. That could be scary in the future. But that's my thought on the Chargers. Now to the next squad. Next up on the list is the Denver Broncos. One of the many surprises last year. I believe the free agency signing they might get, hear me out, Aaron Jones. The Broncos have not had a 1,000-yard receiver since 2019. They need a 1,000-yard receiver. And if you get Aaron Jones, you are setting up a really good running back duo in that a guy I can't remember his name at the moment, but and then also Aaron Jones. Imagine what you could set up in Denver with that. So that I believe would be a really good setup for this team. And then the trade candidate I have for him is Derwin James of the Los Angeles Chargers. I believe he'll be a good player for this team. I believe he will. And it was Javonte Williams I meant in the Aaron Jones discussion. If they go out there and get him, they could set themselves up on defense really well. And then the draft I might have is Trey Harris of the Ole Miss Rebels. Like DK Metcalf, he's got a really good setup. If he goes out there and performs really well with this Denver Broncos team, imagine what this team could be in the future. And they're also in a win now mode because they got one of the best rosters that has been surrounded by the Broncos in recent memory. So that's my thoughts on the Broncos. Now to the next team. Next up on the list is the Raiders of Las Vegas.
away my victory.
No! I did.
The soldier from the mountains.
The Raiders, I believe their free agency signing is going to be former Chief Justin Reed. Because if they want to compete with the AFC West in its current state, they need to go out there and get this man. Because that would be amazing if they went out there and did that. And then the trade candidate that I have is a running back of the Niners, Kyle Juszczyk. Kyle Juszczyk has not been a relative of a factor during the Niners' runs in the playoffs, especially in that Super Bowl 2 years ago. It was probably Christian McCaffrey. If they get Kyle Juszczyk, they would set up a really good running back room. Because I still believe in Zamir White. But then the draft candidate I have is the Ohio State wide receiver, Emeka Ugboga. I'm not sure. I hope I'm pronouncing that guy's name right. I'm hard at these hard to pronounce names. But I believe they go out there and get this guy. Now, I know he's been hinted in the Rams, but they don't need a receiver right now. They're pretty much set, unless they trade Cooper Kupp. But this would be a match made in heaven with this. Imagine. Pete Carroll already went after an Ohio State wide receiver when they selected JSN with the Seahawks. Imagine if they get this guy. They need a receiver. They have a tight end. They'll soon have a quarterback. I believe it'll be Jackson Dart that they get. But this, I believe, is a good setup. I would love to have this pick. But that's my thought on the Raiders. Now to the last team of the AFC. The final team of the AFC is the defending AFC champion, the Kansas City Chiefs. Now the Chiefs, they need some big time help after what happened in the Super Bowl against the Eagles. But I believe the free agency signing they might have, Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is going to be let go by the Buccaneers unless he gets re-signed somehow. If they go out there and get this guy, he's a 1,000-yard receiver, multi-1,000-yard receiver. If you pair him up with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, oh, watch out for that tandem. Then a trade candidate I have, a least likely one, but it would be interesting, Trent Williams of the 49ers. That would be kind of robbery if they did that, because they've already beat up on the Niners enough. Because they beat them in 2 Super Bowls. Imagine if they did this. Oh, they would get on every 49er fan's last nerve. Oh, if they did that, the Niners would hate the Chiefs with a purpose, if you ask me. But the draft pick I have is Tyler Booker of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Took me a while to say the name. But Tyler Booker, I believe he'll be a good player because they need offensive line help after what happened in that Super Bowl. They need big time help. But I believe those are the things that the Chiefs will assess. But now to the NFC side of things. First up of the NFC side, you got one of the biggest disappointments of the NFC. And I'm really disappointed in this team. But I hope they can fix themselves next year. That is the Detroit Lions. I believe they're going to mainly aim for edge rushers to complement Aiden Hutchinson. Because we know that if he's out, they need somebody in there to help out. So here are the three candidates. Free agency signing, I believe they go big here. Josh Sweat. I believe they go after this guy because he's a free agent again of Philly. He's a two-time Super Bowl champion. Imagine this guy with the Detroit Lions and Aiden Hutchinson. Oh, watch out, because that would be a dangerous duo right there. Not only that, for the trade candidate, I have Myles Garrett. If they get this done, this would be the biggest robbery of the Browns that we've seen. If they get Myles Garrett and Josh Sweat, oh, watch out for that defense. And then the draft pick I have, a Tennessee volunteer, James Pierce Jr. Now, this man is an athletic freak. This dude, if they get all three of these guys, they could make a run next year. Because the defense is what they needed help in. The secondary part has kind of been resolved. I believe they go out there in the free agency market, trade market, and draft market, get edge rushers. You're going to need them, especially for the rising up division. But that's my thought on the Lions. But now to the next team. Next up on the list is the Chicago Bears. Now the Bears, I believe they go out there and get three guys. Free agency signing is Trey Smith, the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe that they need offensive line help, especially with Ben Johnson in there. You're going to need some big time help on the offensive line. If they get this done, they can set up Caleb Williams really well in the next season. And then for the trade candidate, I might surprise some people here. Tyrann Mathieu of the New Orleans Saints. We know the Saints are kind of in a rebuild mode right now. If they want a guy that is a stud safety, then this is the right guy for you. If you had this guy with Jalen Johnson, oh, watch out. Because Tyrann Mathieu still's got some years left in him, and it would be good years spent with the Bears, especially since they're going to try to compete for a playoff spot next year. Then another draft, I have another offensive lineman, Devon Jackson. Devon Jackson. Now, Devon Jackson, I like this guy. He is a really good offensive lineman. He was a part of the Ohio State Buckeyes. This, I believe, would be a really good move if they could get this done. They need big time help in the offensive line, maybe some more help in the edge rushers, but I believe they go out there and get this done. That's my thoughts on the Bears. Now to the next squad. Next up, you got the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings, I believe they might go out there and try a sneaky strategy. And I believe one of those guys is going to be, of the free agency market, Ronnie Staley. Now, I believe that this guy could be a really good stud set up for this squad. I believe that if Ronnie Staley goes to this team, they could really help the offensive line because you need big time help after what happened to Sam Darnold. Then, in the next trade candidate is Denzel Ward of the Cleveland Browns. Now, the Browns, I believe they'll let go of a few of their pieces because they are in a rebuild right now. They need some big time guys. And if you want to be in a win now mode, if you're Minnesota, if Byron Murphy Jr. does go away, this is the right guy for them. And then the draft candidate I have is Amrant Mabo. Now, Mabo, I believe this guy is going to be a good offensive lineman in the NFL. He's from Memphis. Not Memphis, Missouri. Missouri is really good, and I believe they're being underestimated. This guy, Mabo, I believe this guy could be a really good offensive lineman in the NFL. So that's my thoughts on the Vikings. Now to the next squad. Next up is the Green Bay Packers. Now, the Packers. The free agency signing I have for them is DJ Reed. Now, DJ Reed, I would love to see this idea happen because they need some more help in the secondary. If they get this guy, if Jair Alexander does walk, he could be the solution. Because even though he was in New York, he actually had some good time, progressing time there. If they want a good safety for the future, get DJ Reed. Then trade, I believe they might try to reach for Max Crosby. Because Max Crosby, I think he would be amazing in this Packers team, which would make me terrified of him even more. But Max Crosby in this team, I would see as a scary unit. And then the draft player I have, Nick Scordon of the Texas A&M Aggies, defensive lineman. If they go out there and get this guy, he's a big physical man. I like the way this guy looked, especially in that game against LSU. But that's my thoughts on the Packers. Now to the next team. Next up, you got the New Orleans Saints.
It's quiet. Too quiet. Where is everybody?
Now the Saints, I believe that in free agency, I think they might go after a stinky guy, Bradley Bozeman. Bradley Bozeman, I would love to see this guy as an offensive lineman with this team because he is a center for this team. He would be an amazing piece. I believe he would fit really well with New Orleans and what they're trying to do. But next up is a quarterback that I don't think will get traded, but it would be interesting. Matthew Stafford. If they want to go out there and make themselves a bigger threat, then man, do we have the quarterback for you. Matthew Stafford, I believe, would be a big piece because Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler are not quite the guys. And although I do like Spencer Rattler in the future, I believe they'll cut Derek Carr and let this man in if this happens. And I believe that Spencer Rattler will learn a thing or two from Matthew Stafford and get a quarterback for the future. But then draft is Josh Connerly Jr. of the Oregon Ducks. Now, I know that the Ohio State game kind of had everyone up in shambles. But hear me out. This is an offensive lineman of formerly known number one Oregon, undefeated before they faced Ohio State. This would be amazing if this happened. Josh Cornerly is an amazing stud as a O lineman and would fit very well in the NFL, which is why I have him going to the Saints. Now to the next team. Next up is the Carolina Panthers. Now, I do think this might possibly happen. I think that the Panthers might reach for a wide receiver that's currently a free agent. He spent some years with Minnesota, Buffalo, and recently the Texans. Y'all know where I'm going. Reaching for Stephon Diggs. Hear me out. They need a new receiver, another receiver to complement this team. Get Stephon Diggs. He is a stud wide receiver. Now, if it wasn't for his injury in the Texans, he probably has a better year. You could get him for very cheap, especially coming off the year that he came off of. Then for the trade candidate, I have Kenyon Green. Kenyon Green. Now, Kenyon Green is a guard. If they need offensive linemen to help him out. And Kenyon Green, I think, would be a perfect man to suit up for this. And then the draft candidate I have, Josh Simmons of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, they need offensive linemen primarily. I believe they'll assess these needs, and if they do, maybe they're a dark horse team next year. But that's my thoughts on the Panthers. Now to the next team. Next up on the list is the defending NFC South champion, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now the Bucs, after an early season exit to the Washington Commanders, now they need to fix up that defense, which is why I have all of these as defensive guys. Next, for the first one of the free agency signing, former Chief Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton, I believe, would be a really good piece for this defense, especially if they want to help win now, because they are in a win now mode. We saw their playoff run 2 years ago. If they had a better defense, maybe they could pass Washington. Who knows? But the trade candidate I have is Greg Newsome of the Cleveland Browns. Like I said, with Denzel Ward, they could reach for a guy like this because the Cleveland Browns are in a rebuild mode. They need a guy like this. Greg Newsome is an amazing ball hawk, is the best way to sum him up. And then the draft pick I have is Shamar Stewart of the Texas A&M Aggies. I believe this would be a kind of sneaky pick because that would be a really good setup for this defense. He is an amazing freak athlete. He's an amazing pass rusher. If they get this guy, watch out for that defense. But now we'll move on to the next team. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons, one of the biggest disappointments of the season. But I believe they're going to main for defensive guys because I believe the defense needs some help. So first up, free agency signing, I gotta say, Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick was amazing during his time in Philly. Now the Jets kind of intoxicated him a little bit. But if he goes to a place like Atlanta that needs big time rushing help, this is the right guy for them. Hassan Reddick has been a really good player, and I believe he would excel if he joins up with this team. Trade candidate I have is Mozzie Smith of the Cowboys. Now, Mozzie Smith has not been much of a factor with the Dallas Cowboys, but I believe that if the Falcons reach for him, they would get a good piece, kind of a good sneaky type of piece that could help them in the future, and maybe a possible future trade candidate. Then draft, I believe they're going to assess another edge rushing need in Michael Williams of their own home state, the University of Georgia. I believe Michael Williams is a good piece. I believe if they reach for this guy, they could be a scary team next year. They have already a very scary offense. That is, if they have the right quarterback, they can be a scary team. But they just need the quarterback to help them do that. But that's what's on the Falcons. Now on to the next team. Next up, you got one of the biggest surprises from the NFL season last year, the Washington Commanders. Making the NFC Championship before getting beat by the Eagles. But I believe they'll make some good moves. So here's the moves I have for them, all defense. The first move I have for them in free agency is Khalil Mack. Now, they already have Bobby Wagner behind there. But if they get this guy, Khalil Mack, that could add up really good in their defense. He was really good with the Chargers. If the Chargers do not re-sign Khalil Mack, then I would 100% see him going to the Washington Commanders. Next up on there is Sam Hubbard. Hubbard, I believe, is a good player, but he's not been too good in Cincinnati. So I believe that the Bengals will look to try to trade him, maybe for some more draft capital. So I believe that the Commanders would be a good trade candidate for Sam Hubbard because he's a good player, and I believe he would fit really well with this Commanders defense. And then the selection I have for this defense is Walter Nolan, another man of the Ole Miss squad. Walter Nolan, is a scary athlete. I would love to see this guy as a Seahawk, but I think that they need offensive line right now. I believe that Walter Nolan would fit really well into the Commander system, especially on how far close they are to competing within the NFC. We already saw what Jane Daniels can do. As long as he doesn't have a sophomore slump, they can be a contender in the NFC. So that's my thoughts on the Commanders. Now to the next team. Next team on the list is the New York Football Giants.
All hail the New York Giants!
Now the Giants, I believe their free agency candidate that they could sign is Cam Robinson because they need some offensive line help, especially if you're going to go out there and get a quarterback. But I believe that Cam Robinson had some good time in Minnesota. But I believe if he goes to New York, he'll help their offensive line dramatically, especially if Evan Neal gets traded. Then a trade candidate I have for the defense is Quay Walker of the Green Bay Packers. Now, Quay Walker, he's been a good piece, but I think that the Packers might get some more defensive guys in this upcoming draft because this is a good draft for defensive guys. But then the draft, I think the quarterback they're going to get is Shador Sanders. Now, Sanders, I do have some questions about him, but I would love to see him in New York to kind of get the Giants a little bit of hope. Because I believe the Giants, if they can get the right pieces around that rookie squad that we saw last season, that this could be a scary unit. If they can get a quarterback that can go in there and be a good quarterback, at least manageable, like a Shador Sanders, and get offensive line fixed, then they could be a really contender. So, I mean, not Super Bowl contender, but obviously a playoff contender, maybe a dark horse. But that's my thought on the Giants. Next up to the Next up to the next team. Then next up, we don't even need to really talk about this team because they're such a big of a heck hole. The Dallas Cowboys.
I just love the smell of fear. Oh my! Ah! Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, now you die.
The Cowboys, I believe the free agency move they'll make is to go out there and get Carlton Davis. Now, I know they need some help in run defense, but they also need some help in passing defense also. So I believe that they'll go out there and get Carlton Davis as a good free agency candidate. Then the trade candidate I have is another corner, Jair Alexander. If they can get him as the Packers, if the Packers are gonna let him go, they could get some really good stuff from Jair Alexander because he's a good covering corner. And if he goes to Dallas, he can help them out dramatically. And then the draft candidate I have very high for this team, running back Ashton Genty. Now I believe Genty is going to be a good piece for this team. If Genty goes to the Cowboys, they need some big help in the run game on both sides of the ball. This would be a really good start for Jerry Jones to say that they're actually all in. So that's my thoughts on the Cowboys. Now to the next team. Next up, you got the defending Super Bowl champion, the Philadelphia Eagles.
Nice try. Your act's over, but you may win this time. Chia physique. Well, this stinks.
The free agency signing I see for them is Zach Bond. Zach Bond, I really like this guy. They need to retain this guy. If they're going to have a chance to go back to back, re-sign that guy. But then I don't think they're going to go after a trade. So in that category, I have none. And then draft, we know that they're going to take the best defensive player available. So I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant. I believe that Kenneth Grant coming out of Michigan is going to be a really good piece for a defense in need. If he goes to the Philadelphia Eagles, it would already add to Howie Roseman's GM mentality. So that's my thoughts on the Eagles. Now to the next team. Next up, I think they were a surprise team. I'm not sure because I haven't seen much from this team. The Arizona Cardinals. The free agency signing I have for this team is Oza Odigizua. Odigizua, I believe, could be a good piece. They need some help on their defensive side if they can go out there and be a real sneaky team. I think if they get this guy, they could be a really sneaky squad. And then trade, I think this could happen, but I'm not sure. Minka Fitzpatrick. I believe if they go out there and get Minka Fitzpatrick, oh, this team could be really good. I believe that if Fitzpatrick goes to this team, then this team could be really freaking scary. And then the draft candidate I have for him is Derek Harmon, defensive lineman of Oregon. Now, if they need some help in the defensive category, I think their offense is sold, but Kyle Murray not sure because they kind of had a malfunction at the later part of the year. But Derek Harmon, I believe that they could be if he could go to Arizona, they can make him a contender. But of course, I'll have to wait and see because unless they beat Seattle, I'll not be sold on them until that happens. But that's our thoughts on the Cardinals. Now to the next team. Next up on the list, do we really have to talk about this team? The Los Angeles Rams. The team that's always the thorn down the Seahawks' dank side.
You have annoyed me for the last time. Yep.
They have always been the thorn in my team's side. And I'm getting really sick and tired of it if you ask me. That's another story for another day. But the Rams, I believe they could go after some sneaky picks. If they do get rid of Cooper Kupp, free agency signing, and hear me out on this, is Juju Smith Schuster because he's a Super Bowl champion with the Chiefs. He is a good wide receiver, and he's kind of similar to Cooper Kupp in a way. But I believe Juju Smith Schuster could be a really good piece and a good addition to this squad. And then a trade candidate that could happen later on in the year is Tyson Campbell of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, their quarterback room is already good enough. But if they want to go out there and be a real team, I think Tyson Campbell would be a really good piece for them. And then draft, I'm going to say Notre Dame player Benjamin Morrison. Benjamin Morrison, I believe, could be a really sneaky type corner in the league. I watched this kid in his days in Notre Dame, and I believe he's a good piece. I believe if the Rams can get him, I think they'll get another steal at the secondary position. But that's my thought on the Rams. Now to the next team. Next up on the list, you got my team, the Seattle Seahawks.
Seahawks!
Now the Seahawks, I believe there's some things that could work out really well for them. Now I got two defensive guys and an offensive guy. First guy, free agency, re-sign Ernest Jones. Get him back. Because when he came into this team, he was an outstanding guy. He was amazing during his time with this team in the later part of last season. I think their top priority should be re-signing Ernest Jones. And then a trade candidate, I think this one might be one that's kind of slept on, but this guy's a physical freak defensive tackle athlete. Jeffrey Simmons. We know that the Seahawks traded for Leonard Williams midway through a few years ago. Imagine Jeffrey Simmons coming to the Seahawks team. Jeffrey Simmons is a Tennessee Titan. He's wasting his prime years in Tennessee. If he goes to a team like Seattle with the current squad that they have set up, with Iron Murphy, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, Leonard Williams, and Uchenna Nwosu, and many other guys, watch out for that defense. Jeffrey Simmons, I believe, could be the missing key, could be the missing piece on this offense. On this defense, my bad. And then draft, I believe the Seahawks will go after Cameron Williams, offensive lineman. I like the idea of Calvin Banks, but the only concern I have about him is the injury history. That's my only concern. Cameron Williams, on the other hand, came from the same Texas team and is actually really sneaky. I like the way Cameron Williams has looked. If the Seahawks want to go out there and fix their offensive line, I believe that is going to be a main priority for this team. They're going to keep most of the guys from that roster back. Re-sign Ernest Jones, your top priority. Trade for Jeffrey Simmons. And draft Cameron Williams. That's what's all to my Seahawks. Now to the last team. Last but not least of the NFC. To wrap this video up, do we really need to talk about this team? Because I don't think they're really contenders, but y'all can say what you want. The San Francisco 49ers.
Next floor, bottom of the food chain. A word of advice: stop thinking aloud. Such irony.
The Niners, after seeing what the Eagles did last year, now the 49ers have to now compete with them and the Chiefs. But the 49ers, I see them signing a free agent offensive lineman that could be kind of sneaky. Will Fries of the Colts. Now, Will Fries, I believe he's a really good player. He's a really good type of offensive lineman. And if the Niners are actually going to be really good, they need offensive lineman reinforcements. And trade, I don't have any because, well, except letting go of Deebo Samuel. That's all I can think of at the moment. Then the draft, I believe they're going to assess the offensive line even more and draft Will Campbell out of LSU. I believe that they are going to play it safe. They want to keep that same squad that they had last year because the injury bug was going as crazy as can be. They want to keep that same squad and try to compete within the NFC. Now, do I think they're Super Bowl contenders? Heck no. But I believe that if they can get offensive line help, I could see them maybe at the least getting 11 wins at the ceiling and then 9 wins as the floor. But that's my thoughts on the Niners. Y'all can have your thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys agree with some of the guys I have on my lists? And if you have a team that your team would want to do, let me know of a free agent that they would sign, a player that they could trade for, and a player that they should draft. Let me know in the comments what you think down below. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to do me a favor. Smash that like button down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, I'll see you all in the next one. Ciao for now.